Rachel Gunzig was a spy. It was her way of changing the world for the better. Rachel is a heroine to my family. She hid my father and uncle from the Nazis when their parents were deported. Most of the people at this family reunion owe their existence to her. I wanted to know more about her and discovered an amazing woman who put her ideals before herself and her family.
So, my dear, you look surprised. Maybe you were expecting Martha Hari. This is what a retired spy looks like. I am a successful businesswoman in Brussels, a capitalist. I own a big furniture store. I have invented a gadget that cleans Venetian blinds. I look very conventional. No one looks twice at me in the street. But ordinary-looking people can have extraordinary stories to tell. My first memory is of a freezing winter in Warsaw. We were so poor. The children had one pair of boots between us, and when one went out, the others stayed home. My mother sewed a dress with giant pockets and went out scavenging. She came home with her dress weighed down with flour. We put the flour into packets, which she went out to sell. I dreamed of having a doll, but we couldn't afford one. I caught typhoid and lay delirious. My mother bought a doll with the last of her money. When I got better, the doll was burnt. It carried the sickness and had to be destroyed. I learned very young to make personal sacrifices for the greater good.
My Aunt Rachel represented to me someone who had always lived by her ideal. I knew by that time I'd asked enough questions, started hearing about it, how she had started right from her young years as a teenager in school, in college, to be affected by the unhappiness, the misery in the world, and the desire to change it.
The poverty and the suffering of the Jews in Poland made me long for political change. I learned about the Russian Revolution and its promise of justice for all. I joined a socialist Jewish youth group, Hashomer Hatzair. At the age of 18, I left my family for Palestine, eager to create a new world order. Being a pioneer in Palestine was backbreaking work. I didn't complain. I was young and strong. But I came to see the Zionist dream was a mirage. The rich Jews who owned the orange groves cheated the poor Jewish and Arab workers. I wanted to unionize Arabs and Jews to strike together for better pay. I was ridiculed and left the kibbutz after 4 years. I went to Belgium, where my family had emigrated and my mother had a shop. I qualified as a pharmacist. I suppose I had gained a name as an outspoken activist. Anyway, the communists got to hear of me and asked me to join them. I was thrilled to accept because the communists were the romantic revolutionaries of our time. That was when I fell in love with Dolly Gunzig. Dolly was a Czech immigrant who, like me, had left Palestine and become a communist.
It was 1936, and the fascists were trying to kill the new Spanish Republic. The Nazis were bombing Madrid, using it as target practice for the larger war to come. Rachel and Dolly joined the fight.
Dolly recruited volunteers into the international brigades. I was in charge of the pharmacy and delivered medical supplies to the front lines.
Her period in Spain was the most satisfactory period of her life as an activist. As she said in some interviews, and the ones I recorded, she was there because she wanted to be there. She felt she was directly involved. There were no ifs and buts. The enemy was there. He had to be stopped. He had to be beaten.
Dolly was an excellent horseman, so he became a cavalry officer. It was madness to pitch horses against fascist tanks and airplanes. But what choice did we have? The West refused to intervene. How differently things would have been had it made a stand against Hitler in Spain. We were losing the war, and I had my own worries. I was pregnant. Dolly and I had to marry by post because he couldn't leave the front. I was trapped in the battle at Matara when my labor pains started, and my cries mingled with the moans of the wounded.
Bien, je suis né en Espagne, à la fin de la guerre civile d'Espagne. Et je suis né à Mataro, au moment où Mataro était bombardé, était en flammes. C'était grosso modo la fin, la débâcle, comme on dit, après laquelle il y a eu l'exode des survivants de la guerre d'Espagne. Et donc moi en particulier avec ma mère, qui a retraversé la frontière française. Les Français avaient organisé des camps de regroupement. Et donc, j'ai passé effectivement quelques mois de ma vie dans ce camp.
Our belief in communism had been shaken in Spain. The Russians had taken Republican gold and sent us weapons which did not fit together, and ammunition which did not fit the weapons.
Où ils recevaient des médicaments qui n'étaient pas du tout ceux qui... Donc tout se passait pendant la guerre d'Espagne comme s'il y avait une volonté systématique de casser, sans le dire, ce qui était en train de se produire. Donc ça jetait un certain trouble.
When we learned of the Nazi-Soviet pact, we couldn't believe it. But we were so brainwashed, we thought Stalin must have his reasons.
Soon after came the shattering news of Germany's invasion of Poland, the start of World War II. Fully aware of the Nazi atrocities against the Jews, Rachel and Dolly returned to Belgium. They joined the resistance.
We organized escape routes for prisoners, financed safe houses, and printed false IDs and ration cards. Dolly became director of a clothing factory that was very profitable. The profits financed our resistance work.
New warm garments for the soldiers on the front have arrived.
We made woolen clothes for German troops on the Eastern Front.
Provisioning of the active forces before Leningrad.
I felt terribly about this at first, until Dolly pointed out that we were buying poor quality wool, real junk, so that the clothes would tear before they were worn. This was one way we sabotaged the Germans. More importantly, we were picking up secret information about troop movements, which we deduced from the amount and type of clothing ordered. Dolly and I had a beautiful apartment and entertained often. The party ordered us to cut contact with our communist and Jewish friends, who thought we had joined the enemy. No one guessed this was a facade, and we were pumping our guests for information. This is how we came to be spies for the Red Orchestra.
The Red Orchestra was a Soviet spy network with agents in Nazi Germany, Holland, France, Switzerland, and Brussels. They passed information to the pianists, as the radio operators were called, who transmitted coded messages to Moscow. The agents included top officers in the German High Command, which meant that Moscow knew of Berlin's decisions within hours. The orchestra passed on details of the exact time and place of the invasion of the Soviet Union. Unknown to them, Stalin ignored the reports and inexplicably refused to put his troops into a state of alert.
That terrible slaughter on the Eastern Front, the millions of innocent people killed, could have been avoided. So much for that megalomaniac's infallible judgment.
Stalin finally listened when the Red Orchestra gave detailed warning of Hitler's planned offensive on Stalingrad. The information helped to spring a trap, which led to the Germans' surrender and turned the course of the war.
My little family paid dearly for our involvement in the Red Orchestra. One day, Dolly, little Edgar, and I had an outing in the park.
Nous sommes allés nous promener à l'extérieur de Bruxelles et nous avons déjeuné dans un petit restaurant. Et je me souviens de l'ambiance avec mon père et ma mère. Et puis mon père est parti. Je me souviens de sa disparition dans cette image. Mais cette disparition-là est aussi une disparition définitive, puisque mon père s'est rendu à une réunion et qu'il a été pris et que je ne l'ai donc jamais revu. Voilà mes premiers souvenirs avec mon père.
Dolly was imprisoned in the jail at Saint-Gilles. The Germans held him there for months, torturing and interrogating him. I had to see Dolly one last time. I took my false ID card and I got a pass to the prison. I was terrified because they would have killed me had they known who I was. It was like walking into the wolf's mouth. Dolly told me in code that they were trying to make him tell where the Red Orchestra agents lived, and they must leave at once. The orchestra ignored the warnings, and soon after there was a raid on the Rue des Atrebats while they were transmitting. The Germans cruelly tortured them, men and women. I never saw Dolly again. After the war, I learned that he had been deported to Mauthausen concentration camp and was shot trying to escape. The mass deportation of Jews had started. The Gestapo ransacked my flat and were after me. My family was in great danger. And the party expected me to hide them so I could get on with my work. I found a Christian family to look after my nephew Marcel and his brother Jacques, whose father died in the camps. I hid my parents. And there were also Dolly's little nephews, baby Robert and his brother Eugene, whose parents died in Auschwitz. The mother just had time to leave my address on a scrap of paper before she was taken. I placed Edgar in the care of some elderly ladies who doted on him.
J'ai eu beaucoup de chance. J'ai eu énormément de chance par rapport à beaucoup d'autres enfants et beaucoup d'autres familles, et par rapport à tout ce qui se passait comme horreur d'ailleurs en Europe, puisqu'elle a trouvé une famille de vieilles filles, c'est-à-dire trois sœurs qui vivaient avec leur père, un peu à l'extérieur de Bruxelles, une famille catholique, moyennement pratiquante, qui n'avait pas d'enfants. J'avais donc à ce moment-là 38, 42, 4 ans, et j'étais accueilli là comme un prince. Je ne voyais ma mère que très épisodiquement. C'était pour moi, très curieusement, une personne de plus en plus étrangère. Un rapport très difficile. Formellement, je savais bien qu'il y avait le mot mère, maman, mais ça ne représentait plus rien. Mon vrai attachement sentimental, c'était les gens chez lesquels j'étais. Et elle venait donc me chercher en m'apprenant, entre autres, en me disant, entre autres, que mon nouveau nom était... Je changeais continuellement de nom. Je m'appelais Bataille, je m'appelais Le Noir, puisqu'elle changeait continuellement de nom, et donc je savais que je devais bien retenir que mon nom c'était Bataille ou c'était Le Noir.
I had to make money to pay for the safe houses. So many people were counting on me. So I went to our factory and took everything I could. I couldn't lift machinery, but I cleared out everything else, including all the wool. I was trembling like I was in a trance. I managed to bring it all back to the house where I was hiding and promptly sold it. The party instructed me to smuggle jewels into France. It was very risky, and the time came when I was arrested at the border. I confessed all to the customs officer and threw myself at his mercy. I had lost all hope. I was convinced I would be shot.
Go quickly. Front gate is open.
The customs officer gave me money and instructions.
Give these cigarettes to the border guard. Say they are from Francois.
Incredible as it seems, this is what happened. I had more lucky escapes. One day, I was at home and the doorbell rang. I looked out of the window and saw the police. I quickly put on a wig, got my shopping bag and went downstairs. "Are you Madame Gunzig?" they asked. "No," I replied confidently. "That's the lady on the top floor." I let them in and fled.
Being a spy was her duty and was what she had to do to better the cause. And personally, she could be quite cold about certain things, quite distant. She managed not to get too involved emotionally. At least that was on the surface. I must say that she was very emotionally involved when she slept, because I remember after the war, I could hear her screaming during her many nightmares. She could also take on a different persona. I found that seeing her at different stages of her life through many photographs, sometimes she looked one person and a completely different person in another photograph. And she did take on, in reality, many different roles in her life. She was the businesswoman, she was the spy, she was the fighter, she was the pharmacist, she was the translator. I mean, for all these reasons, she was a very impressive person, and she impressed me. And I always held in high regard for that.
I was in Brussels for the liberation. For me, it was terrible. I cried more than during the war. An American soldier said, "Why are you crying, lady? You should be happy." But how could I be happy without Dolly?
After the war, Rachel reclaimed her family. It was traumatic for Edgar and her nephew Marcel to leave their surrogate families, but she felt it was right they should live with her. She enrolled both boys in a left-wing Jewish youth group.
We played, we sang, we danced, and we were also indoctrinated into the what was going to be the salvation of the world, namely the communist ideal. And so I switched from being a religious bigot, having become Christian during the war, to become very much of a red bigot.
Satisfied the boys were in good hands, she threw herself into her work. She built a textile business and became one of the richest women in Belgium. Her wealthy lifestyle, which afforded cars, fur coats, and foreign holidays at a time of national austerity, was strangely at odds with her political beliefs.
But I was still a communist, and I gave most of my money to the party. Oh yes, the party was demanding more and more money. I said, "Look, there are other people in this business. I have to show a profit." But they didn't care. And I did as they ordered. The truth is, I felt uneasy being a grand lady. I wanted to continue the fight for social justice. I still thought communism was the answer. I felt I did not belong in Belgium. Remember, the Cold War had started. The Justice Department told me frankly, "Yes, you and your husband were very generous to Belgium, but were you not even more generous towards your party?" And flatly refused us citizenship. As fate would have it, I visited Poland in 1950 for a reunion of Spanish Civil War veterans. All my old friends had been made government ministers. They were urging me to come back, build a great new society with us. I decided to return to Poland and to take Edgar with me.
And I decided, no, I don't want to go to Poland, you know. And my grandmother said, over my dead body, am I going back to Poland, you know?
I asked Edgar if he wanted to go to Poland, and he was very enthusiastic. His friends at the youth group thought he was a hero.
J'étais endoctriné, ne l'oubliez pas, et de ce point de vue-là, j'étais évidemment enthousiaste de partir, mais c'était un enthousiasme purement d'endoctrinement et intellectuel. Vu rétrospectivement, c'est absolument de la folie, ce retour. Le grand choc, quand on est arrivé, c'est que ma mère s'est rendue compte, rapidement, que tous ses anciens amis, tous ces gens avaient été mis en prison et qu'un grand procès se préparait, comme le procès Slański qui se déroulait au même moment à Prague. Et parmi ces gens, tous les Gomulka et autres, peu importe les noms, étaient en prison. Mais ma mère ne le savait pas. Et donc elle arrivait en demandant « Puis-je parler à un tel ? Où est l'adresse d'un tel ? Où est le numéro de téléphone d'un tel ?» Et donc elle était immédiatement extraordinairement suspecte. Mais ce qui l'a probablement sauvée, c'est que son attitude était tellement naïve et presque, pour utiliser d'ailleurs ces mots, stupide, qu'on l'a laissée, on s'est dit, on va un petit peu regarder ce qu'elle fait. c'est vraiment l'aveuglement dû à un endoctrinement qui dépasse l'imaginable dans la vie d'aujourd'hui. Les gens étaient tellement endoctrinés, ils avaient une telle croyance profonde dans l'idéal.
I had no job, no money, nowhere to live. I was treated like a leper, and the police followed my every move. I had no choice but to put Edgar in an orphanage.
C'était des lieux absolument effroyables, parce que c'était des endroits où se retrouvaient beaucoup de jeunes, de tous âges, disons de mon âge à l'époque, grosso modo 14 ans, mais jusqu'à 20 ans, qui avaient perdu leurs parents pendant la guerre, ou qui étaient des délinquants, c'est-à-dire qui étaient des vrais voyous, qui avaient eu des problèmes avec la police. Et les voyous, à l'époque, en Pologne, ça n'a rien à voir avec les voyous que je connaissais en Belgique, qui étaient des enfants de cœur, qui étaient des anges par rapport à ce qu'il y avait là. C'était vraiment très dur. Les premiers cours que j'ai eus, je me souviendrai toujours, c'était des cours de russe, donnés aux Polonais pour qu'ils apprennent le russe. Mais moi, comme je ne connaissais ni le polonais ni le russe, je vivais dans une atmosphère surréaliste. Et ça aurait presque été comique, ça aurait presque été drôle s'il n'y avait pas eu le reste, c'est-à-dire la violence et surtout, j'y viens, l'antisémitisme. L'antisémitisme est l'antisémitisme violent, l'antisémitisme virulent est la chose la plus dure qui marquait ce séjour-là et qui conditionnait tout le reste. Il est arrivé quelquefois que l'on m'agresse physiquement dans des circonstances multiples.
When I realized Edgar was being attacked for being Jewish, that was it. But we were trapped behind the Iron Curtain. I had to plan our escape. Luckily, the party was beginning to trust me. They sent me to Vietnam to translate for the Polish delegation, which negotiated the French withdrawal after Dien Bien Phu. I thought if Edgar joined me, we could escape via China. But I couldn't get him out.
In 1956, 3 years after Stalin died, he was denounced by Khrushchev, and nationalist unrest swept through the Eastern Bloc. Polish leader Gomulka returned to power. Anti-Soviet rioters filled the streets, and Jews were allowed to leave the country. Rachel and Edgar seized their chance, assuming they could return to Belgium.
But the Belgians didn't want me, even though I was through with communism. We spent a year in exile, and I had to make an arranged marriage with an elderly Belgian to gain Belgian citizenship for us.
Vous voyez, ces médailles, par exemple, elles sont très représentatives d'une ironie absolument incroyable. Ce sont des médailles que mon père et ma mère ont reçues du royaume de Belgique pour leur bravoure, pour leur héroïsme dans le mouvement de la résistance. Et tout en ayant ces médailles, ces gratifications formelles, ma mère se trouvait confrontée, comme je l'ai expliqué, avec un refus de la Belgique non seulement de lui donner la nationalité belge, mais même de l'autoriser à entrer sur le territoire belge après notre aventure polonaise qui n'avait pas été, il faut bien le dire, une aventure très destructrice pour la Belgique. Et non seulement il n'autorisait pas ma mère à rentrer en Belgique, mais il ne m'autorisait pas non plus moi-même à entrer en Belgique. J'étais considéré et j'ai reçu des papiers comme ce qu'on appelle pupille de la nation, c'est-à-dire enfant et orphelin depuis que mon père est mort, de résistants. Et à ce titre-là, par exemple, j'ai pu faire mes études à l'université gratuitement, au moment même où je n'étais pas encore accepté en Belgique. Voilà un exemple, en tout cas, de l'absurdité humaine, certainement. Un bel exemple.
She came back without a penny, And in no time at all, she made an invention to clean Venetian blinds. And she survived from her apartment doing that sort of business till she got enough money eventually to open a fancy furniture store of contemporary furniture. When she died, I do recall that there was very little money. You had to sort of scrounge to find, money for a funeral, which is very revealing in a sense. She hadn't accumulated anything. She hadn't hidden anything. She had, all her life, she managed. She may have had ups and downs, but by the end, she came the way she arrived, with very little.
C'est vrai qu'on a parlé beaucoup de Rachel ici. On a peut-être peu parlé de ma mère, et ce n'est pas une coïncidence, parce que la chose que je comprends le moins, que je connais le moins de ma mère, c'est bien la nature de ses relations affectives avec l'extérieur, et donc en particulier, en premier lieu, avec moi. Je crois que ces relations affectives-là étaient toujours reléguées au second plan par rapport aux autres, qui sont ces grands mouvements-là.
Je ne regrette pas mes voyages, parce que je crois que c'est la loi, que, un jeune doit, ainsi on trouve son chemin. Mais jamais je ne me laisserai plus vraiment prendre sous l'ordre pour un but qui, soi-disant, sera vraiment le omnium, le meilleur pour le genre humain. Parce que je crois qu'il y a beaucoup de monde qui a compris qu'on ne doit pas et on ne peut pas imposer un but aux gens qui ne le veulent pas.
He did the monster mash. It was a graveyard smash.
The explorer, Sir Walter Raleigh, is credited with introducing the potato to the court of King James I, who was very angry with him, since Raleigh had been sent to South America to bring back gold.
I told the king, "Sire, I have searched the savage shores of the Orinoco River for the legendary treasure, and regret the fiendish natives hid it too well. But I bring you two commodities more precious than gold. The first is tobacco, which the natives set alight and inhale. The other is a culinary delicacy called the potato." And he said to me, "Right, ye mincing English fairy, I'll tak the fags, I'll tak the crisps, and I'll have your head." Ah!
Potatoes are definitely good for us.
Oh, but look how terribly we treat them. We beat them to smithereens. We boil them, and roast them under a searing hot flame. We mash them to a pulp. Enough violence. Is this any way to treat a friend?
after came the shattering news of Germany's invasion of Poland, the start of World War II. Fully aware of the Nazi atrocities against the Jews, Rachel and Dolly returned to Belgium. They joined the resistance.
We organized escape routes for prisoners, financed safe houses, and printed false IDs and ration cards. Dolly became director of a clothing factory that was very profitable. The profits financed our resistance work.
New warm garments for the soldiers on the front have arrived.
We made woolen clothes for German troops on the Eastern Front.
Provisioning of the active forces before Leningrad.
I felt terribly about this at first, until Dolly pointed out that we were buying poor quality wool, real junk, so that the clothes would tear before they were worn.
The Red Orchestra was a Soviet spy network with agents in Nazi Germany, Holland, France, Switzerland, and Brussels. They passed information to the pianists, as the radio operators were called, who transmitted coded messages to Moscow. The agents included top officers in the German High Command, which meant that Moscow knew of Berlin's decisions within hours. The orchestra passed on details of the exact time and place of the invasion of the Soviet Union.
I had more lucky escapes. One day, I was at home and the doorbell rang. I looked out of the window and saw the police. I quickly put on a wig, got my shopping bag, and went downstairs. "Are you Madame Gunzig?" they asked. "No," I replied confidently. "That's the lady on the top floor." I let them in and fled.
Being a spy was her duty and was what she had to do to better the cause. And personally, she could be quite cold about certain things, quite distant. She managed not to get too involved emotionally. At least that was on the surface. I must say that she was very emotionally involved when she slept, because I remember after the war, I could hear her screaming during her many nightmares.
My America, my newfound land. Picture the scene as our great ship rounds the tolling bell of the Jersey Buoy, and with 50,000 tons of steel plate smashes through the waters of Long Island Sound. Ahead of us is the golden span of the Brooklyn Bay Bridge, and on the starboard quarter, the Statue of Liberty herself. Was it just poetic fancy which made us seem to see a glow shining from that torch, held 1,000 feet above our heads? But it's time to tip our hats and turn aside from the tall column shadow of Grand Central Station falls across our path. We are booked on the Silver Chief. When we retire behind the curtains of our comfortable berths, the roaring blackness outside the windows is complete, save for the occasional pillar of fire flaring up from the oil wells under the cooling scrub. 10,000 head of cattle on hoof, packed together in a rolling river of hide and horn, meet our eye when we are woken with steak and eggs by a surly redcap. The Silver Chief is on the Chisholm Trail to Abilene, Amarillo, Lamouride, El Paso, and Dodge. Beyond America, beyond all, nothing lies before us but an endless expanse of blue, flecked with cheerful whitecaps. And with wondering eyes, we stare at the Pacific.